acceptance problem. So I guess that's the way I think about it. Naila, I see your hand is up for our informal pre-discussion. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Greg and Jonathan. Both of your answers are really great, and I'm so glad Marita asked that question, because I think a lot of times we think of universal acceptance as something that applies to internationalized domain names only, and that is absolutely not the case. I mean, there are additional considerations when you're dealing with internationalized domain names when it comes to universal acceptance. But this issue, Marita, has historically existed even as far as the early 2000s, when additional domain, top-level domain names were being added to the root zone. If you talk to Ram Mohan, for example, he explains that what they've gone through with .info, just to make it an accepted top-level domain name that they could use at the time, and the journey is still going, I would say, to this day. And historically, for whatever reason, I think as Greg was touching on, developers, domain, web page creators, what have you, sort of looked at the top-level domain set as a static list, and then assumed that a two-letter code is a CCTLD, and the top-level domains were all three-letter codes, so .org and .com, etc. And so those lists were hard-coded, and they weren't referring necessarily to the list of live root zone top-level domains, where all the authoritative list of root zone top-level domains exist. And so that was it's been an issue where this list is hard-coded, and by really kind of hard-coding a list of what's an authoritative list of top-level domains, it's an exclusion problem. So excluding all the other top-level domains that, the root zone is a live thing. Top-level domains, yes, they're not added and removed every day, but it is a live list. It's not a static list. It's never been. And so I think sessions like this are very good at informing people that this is not a static list that you can refer to and account that it will stay the same for the next 10, 15 years. It needs to be dynamic, and everyone needs to be accounting for that in their system. But thank you. This is a really great question, Marita.
It becomes a question, this is Jonathan Zuck again, it becomes a question of legitimacy of ICANN, frankly. Because if ICANN authorizes new strings to be added to the root, but the majority of software out there rejects them, then it's as if they were not added in the first place. So we need to make sure that we get people updating their code and changing their validation code. Luckily, a lot of code is out there available already to just be dropped into your software to bring it up to date. But I think it really calls into question ICANN's legitimacy if these TLDs fall in the woods and no one hears them. So it's a very important topic for sure.
Yeah, thanks. Marita speaking. Well, that's all very interesting. Quite honestly, I've always thought about it in terms of accents and diacritics and all that kind of stuff. But it never occurred to me that new top-level domains weren't being recognized in an awful lot of places when people pay a lot of money for these top-level domains. So, yeah, that seems like a major disconnect. Thank you.
This is Bill Juris. I thought it was interesting, one of the comments earlier that said about code lasting 10, 15 years. And I think part of the issue is that a lot of that code was written when everything changed every couple of years because things were evolving so fast. And it didn't occur to anybody that if you wrote code in 2000, it would still be going 25 or longer years in the future. And so there was a certain amount, because things were changing so fast, there was a certain amount of blindness about just how how long things would actually last. And I'm not sure we've actually gotten past that today.
It's funny you say that, Bill. You would think the year 2000 would be the year everyone recognized that code can last a long time and cause trouble.
I think it got viewed as a one-off.
I think also the fact that it was solved so well also perhaps made people a little bit complacent about this happening in the future again, and also not realizing fully the extent to which so many people programmed a top level domain to be only 3 characters or less, or programmed and couldn't accommodate anything other than the basic ASCII letters, not even the accented ones, much less other scripts. So it really is, it's to some extent it's a legacy problem, and to some extent it's an awareness problem, and to some extent it's a novelty problem.
I will make a comment, which is that the outreach should be to developers. They're people who are not within the whole ICANN circle. They're, they're the people that have to be talked to. And also, Greg, could you allow me, right-click me and go allow to local record? There are my little dots, Allow to record local files.
Okay, we will be beginning the formal.
We are actually live on the live stream
Yes.
now, left on the...
Yes, Glenn McKnight has noted that, and so has Jolie. We're live on the live stream. We have all of the technical setup ready to go. Yes, and we'll go live on Twitter in progress, given that it's 12:36. And I think, yes, Jonathan says outreach should be to everyday people, which is, us, if you will. Or we're a little bit more than everyday since we're, informed enough to be on this meeting. But it really is a matter of, if you will, complaining or awareness, at every level. Vendors need to speak to their developers and programmers. Developers and programmers need to be spoken to directly. They should be plugged in more. Anybody who communicates with them more directly, registries and registrars and resellers, and website development, companies, I'm thinking, of a Squarespace or a Wix or a WordPress, that are, there really is, promulgating something like this is just a whole lot harder than promulgating, a protocol change or a new top-level domain, that doesn't raise awareness issues. One last informal thing before we begin our formal. Louis rightly pointed out that it's a first-level problem and a second-level problem, because you can have diacriticals at the second level, even if not at the first level, or vice versa. So it really is a broad question. Universal acceptance, really defines a small constellation of problems. I think we'll get into that in a little bit more formal way shortly. But as Jonathan and Marita's dialogue pointed out, it may be everything you think it is and something else. It's sort of the 6 blind men and the elephant story, which is probably no longer politically correct. But the point is that the problem in front of your face is the one that you think may think defines the universe of the problem, but in fact, it's a whole collection of issues that come together to make up the totality of universal awareness. So with that, we'll begin the formal portion of our meeting. Jolie, we're all set up for kind of being formal?
Yeah, you can. I'm switching to the camera from your webcam.
Okay.
Although I don't know. I've got 2 views of them. Go ahead.
Pick the one you think is more flattering, which is probably the one with the camera off. In any case, welcome to the Universal Acceptance Day program that is co-sponsored by NARALO and ISOC New York with the support of ICANN. My name is Greg Shatan. I am the chair of NARALO, the North American Regional At-Large Organization. And more information is available, of course, on the web at www.naralo.org. I'm also the president.
Recording in progress.
I am the president of ISOC New York, and welcoming you to the UA Day presentation, co-sponsored by ISOC New York, NARALO, and supported massively by ICANN. I'd like to introduce today's panel, not to each other, but to you. We have to my left, so this is just in kind of my order, Joe Catapano from ICANN's Global Stakeholder Engagement Team. To his left, we have Sarah Deutsch, who is a member of the ICANN board, but has worn many hats in the ICANN community and in the internet community for many years. I don't want to make you sound old, just experienced. I'm old. In any case, we also have remote presenters as well. We have Louis Houle, who is coming to us from Quebec. Louis will be speaking about some of the special cases, or particular cases, I should say. All the cases are special. That's part of the problem of universal awareness. Particular cases of French language and indigenous language universal acceptance issues. And then to wrap it up, we will have the stentorian voice of Jonathan Zuck. Jonathan is the chair of the At-Large Advisory Council, ALAC, which is the crowning organization of the at-large community at ICANN. As I said, I'd like to thank ICANN for all of their support, including materials. I'd like to thank the Universal Acceptance Steering Group, which I believe includes Louis, for the materials and for all of the work that they've done thanklessly and behind the scenes and sometimes in front of the scenes to advance the cause of universal acceptance and to make the internet more communicative than ever before. In any case, with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Joe Catapano, who will begin with our first presentation of the day. And Joe, I guess you'll be sharing your screen with the presentation, so you'll handle your own slides. And then Sarah, you'll be joining in or commenting or kibitzing.
I can comment or join us.
And I think it would be helpful to kind of have the board's perspective on this as well as any of your other personal, perspectives from your experience on all of this. So without further ado, I will literally hand the mic to Joe Catapano.
Thank you very much, Greg. I'm hesitant to start the formal portion of the program. The informal part at the beginning was so good. As Greg mentioned, I'm the senior manager for stakeholder engagement for the North America region for the ICANN organization. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I've been with ICANN for a little over 9 years now. And before we kind of get going here, I just want to thank the North America Regional At-Large Organization for their role in hosting this event, as well as the Internet Society New York chapter, Moses and Singer for hosting this here in this wonderful historic building in one of my favorite cities of the world. So thanks to them for all of that. I'm going to attempt here to share our. We have a welcome video from Dr. Ajay Data from the Universal Acceptance Steering Group, and to just kind of give us, a good kick us off a little bit. So I'm going to attempt to do that. If it turns out to be a little messy, we can always stop and move on. And Jolly, if you or someone could just enable me to share. All right. And I know that I believe my block is budgeted for 60 minutes, but I'm here to inform you that I will not be taking 60 minutes for this. And I think the group is small enough where, certainly, Sarah, if you have any commentary, while we go along, just please interject and we can go from there.
Joe, you should now be a host.
I think,
Maybe
yeah,
host.
I think we're in good shape here. Let me just check Chrome here. And pop that out.
Интернационализированные доменные имена и адреса электронной почты позволяют государствам, бизнесу и различным организациям наладить взаимодействие с большим числом граждан.
This is not exactly what I was looking for. My apologies.
Do we need to get the sound managed in a different fashion?
Yeah, it could be loud. It's probably louder on
If you will indulge me for one moment. Okay. Well, the
Joel, if you need to unplug me, you can. I don't need all the juice. No.
but regardless, the link to the English version of this video is not where it was yesterday. So, which is fine. That's actually kind of an interesting way to kick off something on universal acceptance, where we're talking about accepting domain names and email addresses in languages other than English. So in some ways, it's a bit appropriate, but seeing as how this is the event for North America and we are conducting it in English, we'll just kick off, and I will share my slides instead, which thankfully are in English for myself, and I'm assuming much of the audience. I'll just hop into presenter view here.
Looks like they're still in English.
Yeah, so we're off to a good start here. So what are we talking about today, and what have we been talking about in the kind of beginning this kind of informal session that we were conducting before we went live here? On a technical level, we're talking about this idea of universal acceptance, and we'll go a little deeper into that in a moment. But what we're really talking about is digital inclusion. And I know that's kind of a buzzword these days, much of it for good reason. But I think what you'll find as we go through this presentation and as you learn more about universal acceptance, the concept, and kind of the operations, you will find that UA, as we call it, is really digital inclusion in action. So what we're going to try and do here over the next few minutes or so is to talk a little bit about universal acceptance, why it matters, and then what we can all be doing to further it along and help people connect. So before we go into universal acceptance, I know we have I won't belabor this part, but I do know we do have some. We obviously have a live stream in addition to the folks on the Zoom. So we may have some folks out there who are not familiar with the domain name system or DNS or ICANN, which is an acronym in and of itself. And ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, if you are not familiar with it. And as it says in that last bullet there, ICANN's technical mission is to coordinate what we call the unique identifiers that help make the internet work. And when we talk about those, we're talking primarily about domain names and internet protocol addresses. So the name and we use names online because they're easier to remember than numbers. So if you look at the third bullet here, the domain name for wikipedia.org there's actually a number behind it, but we won't type in a number because it's complex, it's hard to remember, and it's much easier for people to remember names. But ICANN's main technical mission is to coordinate those two things so that when you type in your address, you get to where you want to go. So this slide is helpful in that it breaks down the domain name and email address as it is, because when we do presentations at ICANN or we go to ICANN meetings, we start throwing around a lot of these terms, and it's helpful, particularly at the beginning, to break it up a little bit and see what we're talking about. So if we're going from left to right here, you can see HTTPS is what the protocol that is being used, and then www dot is the label, and then the third label, example, right? That is part of the domain name, right? That's what we call the second level. The top level is what is in this blue box on the right, which is org, in this example, org and IO, right? So for org, there is an acronym there called GTLD, which is generic top level domain name. And then on the bottom, IO is a country code top level domain name. And there are others, right? So some that might be more familiar. If you're in the US, .us, if you're in Canada, .ca, et cetera, like that. And for generic names, there are many of the familiar legacy ones that we know, .org, .com, .net, et cetera, but there are also many more now, over 1,200, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then as you look down to the bottom here, is a breakdown of the way an email address is constructed. And much of it is, very familiar to us all. And if you go all the way to the right, so the generic top-level domain for that email address that's on this example is .world in Chinese. And you'll see another acronym there, IDN. That stands for Internationalized Domain Name. So what we have now is, in addition to those generic names that I mentioned, the 1,200 or so more that we have now, we also have encompassed within that internationalized domain names. So domain names in non-Latin scripts, of which Chinese here is one. So, and here's this kind of an example of what a slide with some of the text with what I had just mentioned. And what, in addition to, so the new generic top-level domain program, as we call it, which was in 2012, right? So in addition to expanding consumer choice and competition in the domain name marketplace, it also brought internationalized domain names to the internet and made it easier for individuals who conduct business or, anything they do on the internet in non-Latin scripts. It made it easier for them to do that. Now, the issue here, which is part of what we're talking about today, is that universal acceptance kind of needs to be part and parcel of that in order for everything to be fluid and to kind of realize kind of the vision of IDNs and internationalized email addresses. So this slide is just a look at kind of a visual of what I had verbalized previously. So it's a look at kind of the domain name space. And we're talking pre-2009, right? So those are some of those what we call legacy top-level domains. There were 22 in total. Some country, and the country codes below that. As we moved into 2009 and beyond, there's a look at some of the internationalized domain name country code top levels. And then again, 2012, just this massive expansion in the domain name space. And here's some examples of some of the generics that we see out there. There are not only generic names like .bar, but there's also geographic domain names specific to cities, or in some cases countries. There's also brands. So, pick a brand like behind BMW or something, right? So they have their own domain name as well. And then below that, you see those IDNs that I talked about previously. we live in a multilingual world, right? And so this is just kind of a snapshot of where English falls in terms of number of speakers around the globe. And so if we live in a multilingual world, then why do most systems only accept domain names and email addresses in Latin scripts? What about the rest of the world and their users? That's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And here's a look at access globally, and we see obviously, you know, the internet started in North America, and the infrastructure in North America and Western Europe was obviously much more advanced, and the economies are much more advanced. So it stands to reason, obviously, that connectivity and access would be higher in those two areas. However, as you can see, the growth is not in those two areas, right? So the other regions of the world are growing, and in many cases growing quite rapidly. So without adopting universal acceptance, we're cutting a lot of people out. There are, you know, most of the planet communicates not in English. And so that's kind of the impetus behind what we're doing here in UA Day or UA Week, as Greg mentioned previously, is to really raise some awareness here that that this is important, and it's important for us as a global community. So when we talk about universal acceptance and what it is, at its most basic level, it ensures that all domain names, including those IDNs that I talked about, are treated equally and can be used by all internet-enabled applications, devices, and systems. It's a fundamental requirement, if you will, for a truly multilingual and digitally inclusive internet. And you take a look at the last bullet here, it's an important point to make. It is UA is a technical compliance best practice, and it's on all of us, whether that's businesses or advocates or public officials, technologists or end users, to push for systems to be UA ready. There are examples in everyday life of things that aren't necessarily requirements, right? Someone's not going to, you know, punish you or fine you for not doing it, but it's a best practice, right? So I went and got a cup of coffee before when I got off the train here. I tipped the barista. I don't have to do it. It's not a requirement. But in this country, it's a best practice, and most people do it. So here's an example of a UA issue, right, where a valid email is rejected on a form on a website. And I know Nayela and I were in the same meeting. So she thankfully pointed out an example that I was gonna use, and I'll just build on it a little bit. Right, so we were in conversations with Ram about this topic. Ram Mohan, who works for a large registry, and he was trying to register his kid for soccer, and he said, I was trying to do it, and I was putting through the form, and I have a .info email address. Couldn't register my kid. I had to go get a .com to do it. .info has been around for 2 decades. And so if he's having as much trouble with that, think about the ones that have been around for half that time. So we're really behind a little bit here. So it's good that I think we're making this effort here to raise awareness and to really reach out and try and get some of these things on the radar of folks. So here, in terms of kind of why this matters, right? So again, in addition to kind of inclusivity for the internet, it does also enable greater competition and innovation. There are from a sheer kind of economic level, there are business opportunities to this initiative. And it's something unique that if you work as a developer or a system administrator, that you can, stand out a little bit. So if you think about living in a country where English is not the primary language, and trying to communicate effectively, it can be quite a challenge. Now, think about it if you travel anywhere outside of your native country. If you don't know the language, it can be very difficult to get around and do some very simple things. We have tools now that can make it a little easier, and you can kind of squeak by. But for the most part, if you don't speak at least some of the basic terminology in the country that you're in, you're going to have some trouble. So now think of someone using the internet whose native tongue is not English, and imagine what they have to go through to try and just navigate the internet, something that I know I take for granted that I use every day. I turn it on, it works, it's all in English. I'm moving, I'm getting my Uber, I'm getting my DoorDash, I'm getting my food, all that stuff. Like everything is just very fluid, right? It flows very, very evenly. That's not the case for a lot of, most of the world who do, English is not their first language. Just a little bit about IDNs and email addresses, right? So I think the quote from Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web, is very good. The web does not just connect machines, it connects people. And, when we think about, connecting the world, right, kind of that vision of one internet, universal acceptance is really, it's a key part of that, right? Because it is enabling that connection, right? It's making it easier, right? So it's important as we move forward, certainly, after however, right, the internet's been around for what, 60 years, more or less, a little less.
I'm going to pull a Kanye and grab the mic for just a
second.
Okay. I just want to say, in listening to you, to point out that this is also really a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. And an issue of, if you will, Latin script privilege needing to be erased in the internet. So as we all think about DEI issues, this is really part of it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We could take a look. This is an interesting slide too. I really liked the graphic here, just showing that diversity, really visualizing the kind of what does this look like. And this is only one hemisphere. So, right, it's all, and these are the successful IDNs as of May 2020, as it says on the bottom there. And here is just a slide, it's kind of a word cloud, if you will, on IDN generic top-level domains that are delegated. And here, these are more examples of internationalized domain names, kind of what they look like, just to kind of put a visual to what we're talking about here. In addition to domain names, which has been kind of the primary focus, email addresses obviously are another, the other kind of part of this. And it's the same, again, the same concept. It's just, instead of a domain name attached to a website, it's your email, which is also it's a very personal thing, right? It's something that's attached to you. It's something that you use, again, for most things in your life now. It's right. It's your cell phone number and your email address. Those are like the two most important things now. It's almost more important than your license now, at least in this country. And there's just some examples of internationalized email addresses. So making applications what we call UA ready, right? So it's a 5-step process or a 5-step kind of program here to make something UA ready, right? So the first step is acceptance, so the user can input the characters from their local script into a text field. The second is the validation portion, where the software accepts the characters and recognizes them as valid characters. The third step is the actual process, where the system performs the operations. The fourth step is storage, right? So the database needs to be able to store the text without breaking the data, corrupting the data. And then the final step is the display. So the information needs to be shown correctly. And this slide here shows a little bit about how the ICANN community, with support from the organization as well as the Universal Acceptance Steering Group, right, how we're all moving toward what we call UA readiness. Right, so we mentioned the UASG and their mission to promote universal acceptance globally. ICANN, the organization, we actively promote universal acceptance, obviously through events like these today and across the world. There's also financial support for the UASG coming from that side. And so there's multiple steps to it, right? Outreach events, awareness raising, conducting studies, reporting on seeing issues and letting people know, hey, this is not UA ready, this is not right, we need to fix this, and developing technical trainings, right? So actually, it's nice to be here at a NARALO hosted event earlier, I guess this was last year now. There was a universal acceptance training series hosted by the North America Regional at-Large organization. It was 4 weeks. Other regions, other ICANN regions or other regions of the world have done these training sessions as well. And so these are just some of the things that the org in collaboration with the community has been doing. I highly recommend the Universal Acceptance Steering Group website, uasg.tech. It's got a lot of resources there where you can continue to dive deeper and learn more about these things. ICANN.org has its own UA page as well. The UASG Twitter feed I actually find to be really useful. I believe it's just at UASG Tech, if I remember correctly. Maybe we can put that.
That's right.
Yeah, I think we can put that in the chat too. Great resource to stay on top of some of these things. So now we get to kind of the point, right, which is, well, okay, I'm here. I've been listening to you. Hopefully I'm not asleep yet. But what can I do, right? And so, as part of my job, right, is to interface with the stakeholder groups that we talk about, right? I'll name not all of them will be named here, but a few of them will be. This just has a little more data, but I'm gonna move past this. There we go. Right. So if you're a business stakeholder, right, you can assess your business systems to see if they're compliant with UA. You can update your own IT systems. You can encourage your partners to collaborate and promote UA-related discussions. And you can partner with other organizations to raise awareness around universal acceptance. If you are in government, can UA requirements be a part of government procurement? Can you reach out to your other partners and departments in government and ask to incorporate UA practices? Can you coordinate with your country code top-level domain managers? Or if you're representative on the ICANN's Government Advisory Committee to strengthen universal acceptance. in your country or municipality. If you're from civil society, which I know a lot of folks that attend the Internet Society in New York and NARALO hosted events are, you can encourage your community to attend UA-related events, right? Make your own systems UA ready, promote research, and partner with other organizations, right? There's a bit of strength in numbers here where, if it's just, myself or, someone else from the ICANN organization or the board of the community talking kind of in isolation tends not to land quite as well as if there are 3 or 4 voices from, several organizations, right? And that's kind of what civil society is all about, right? Kind of strength in numbers. On the academic side, which can get forgotten a bit, upgrading their email systems is kind of something on the technical end, but also the curricula at the school, right? Teaching and learning of UA and kind of, really trying to instill this, in those that are at institutions of higher learning and that will eventually be in the workforce in a few years. On the technical side, I know we talked about that, we talked about developers and such, right? Doing trainings, testing issues, flagging issues, reporting bugs, et cetera, are some of the best actions you could take if you're on the technical side. And then domain holder or registrant, you can also read that as end user. Check with your ISP, see if their services are UA ready, and let us know if they're not. Check with your website or email administrator, and create your own awareness, right? Like I said, go to some of those resources from the steering group. Share on social and tell your communities that have an interest in this subject matter. Kind of what you've learned here. This is I won't read this whole slide here, but this is just some of the ongoing work at ICANN through the different sectors on UA itself and from the CCTLD and GTLD side of things. And there's some links down there for more information. And I will wrap. I guess I was right. UASG Tech, excellent. So. Getting involved, right? Here's just some of the links to make it easy for you. We'll share the deck afterwards, so you don't obviously have to write all this down or take pictures of it. There's a LinkedIn group, there's a Facebook group, and of course, reach out to me. If I don't have the answer, I can likely find someone who does. So, I think, and even if at the Q&A too after, or the discussion after, if there are technical questions and one of myself or Sarah can't answer them, or anyone else for that matter, we'll take note of it and we'll make sure to get back to you with a more comprehensive answer. And I will stop sharing, and I will give it back to Greg to MC the rest here.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's an excellent overview of the universal acceptance situation and the only semi-acceptable current state of universal acceptance. I don't want to take too much time because I'd much rather listen to Sarah Deutsch tell us about her view, some of the things happening at the ICANN board, the bigger picture of universal acceptance as she sees it. So Sarah is somewhat the discussant, if you will, of Joe's presentation. So I'll walk over with the microphone and give it to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Greg. And I think Joe really gave you all the details that I could possibly cover, but I would just say from the board's perspective, we're really thrilled both to be here today to celebrate with the community this whole week and Universal Acceptance Day/week. And I would say the board sees this issue as a challenge, but a good challenge. It's one that everyone is really excited about. And I think as Naila noted earlier, ICANN is one small piece of this puzzle. And Joe went through all the areas where ICANN.org and the community is doing really good work in this space. So I would just point out a few things that Joe may not have mentioned. One was that IDNs and universal acceptance are recognized as a strategic focus and are included in the ICANN strategic plan. So they're baked in there. And also, it was good to see that it's baked into our bylaws. So, for example, ICANN commits to adopt and implement policies or procedures that take into account the use of domain names as natural language identifiers. And I would also note on the board level, we have an ICANN board, IDN, and UA working group, and they're very closely monitoring all the activities that are happening in this space and trying to be useful and play a role, the board's proper role on these issues. And then I guess from my personal view, I would also flag this as an issue of human rights. So access to the internet is a fundamental human right, your ability to speak, to participate in society, to work, the right to an education, the right to vote, to pay taxes. These are all in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And when you layer on internet access on top of that, it's interesting. So we have 91.5% of the population in North America is on the internet, yet you have more than 1,000 languages spoken in the Americas generally. So you can be on the internet, but if you can't speak the language, then you're really, really, it's almost like digital exile of sorts. So enabling people's right to use the internet through IDNs and through universal acceptance policies is going to be super, super important. And I also think, looking at society with the waves of immigration we're seeing, we have people traveling from one place to the other. Why shouldn't they be able to fully participate in society through the use of the internet? So those are some of the issues we talk about in the board, and we see it as a source of innovation, driving human rights, and again, a really good challenge, and people are very excited about the possibilities that lie ahead. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Greg.
Greg, turn off that spotlight. Oh, it's all right. We can leave it on, I guess, until Louis talks. Yeah, that's good.
Sarah, thank you. Excellent commentary on the issue, and good to know what the board is thinking about, and that the board is thinking about it clearly, especially as we may be heading sooner than later into a new round of top-level domains, which will only increase the pressure for universal awareness and could well raise new specific instances of awareness problems, or rather acceptance problems, universal acceptance problems, as the creativity and innovation of top-level domains will create new challenges. So our next speaker is Louis Houle, and Louis is with Point Quebec, which is .Quebec for you Anglophones. So Louis needs no introduction. Actually, he probably needs an introduction, but I'm not qualified to give one. So I'm going to meekly run Louis' slides and let Louis talk about his. Go ahead, Louis. Thank you.
Is my audio fine?
Your audio is great.
All right. Just before I start, I just wanted to tell to Jonathan, I had an issue, a couple of years ago. I've been taking care of the website of our core, and we decided to contract a small company here in Quebec City, and I wanted to have a domain name with .Quebec, and they said, we don't do that. We only have three letters, nothing else, and we were in 2020, so imagine. So the reality is sometimes tricky. The other point that I wanted to say is that, Joe, I will come back on a slide that you've been using. So, next slide, please. So as you mentioned, Joe, many people around the world, they're excluded from the internet experience. So this is why I want to take a couple of minutes to tell you what we will go through during our April 24 UA Day in Montreal and Quebec City. And in the second part, I will give you some examples showing why it matters to be able to use French in emails and web addresses. Next slide, please. This one is only because I like what Tim Berners-Lee says, and I wanted to repeat it. The web does not just connect machines, it connects people. Sometimes, in some situations with an ICANN, I felt that the machines were coming a little bit too much on top of people. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. So, oops. You want to come back a little bit? I think that you went too fast. Oh. Okay, so while Greg's looking for the right page, what I wanted you to see is that we will go through really the basic of UA in Montreal. We're going to talk about the situation, and we're going to have a presentation by .ca. We'll have a presentation by .Quebec. We'll have a presentation that will be technical by COFOMO, very technical, and we'll have a wrap-up from ISOC Quebec during that day. So okay, so you were seeing were the slides that I've been using during ALAC a week ago in Cancun, saying that what's universal acceptance and who runs the organization, what's the ICANN global contribution to universal acceptance. We're going to see afterwards how it works technically, how you can have addresses that are UA accepted. And we will go through also some of the informations that a user wants to have. I don't know, Greg, if you...
Lou, we have the slides are back. We are on slide number 4 right now.
Right, so let's go to the next slide, please. So the French language observatory, the OLF, shows that there is now 321 million French-speaking persons on Earth. The reason why in statistics French-speaking people are not all that numerous is that in many countries, notably Africa, you have two languages, two official languages. You have the native language and you have French. So this is why there's such a difference between some figures that you might see in the statistics. So let's go to the next slide, Greg. So the UA Day, as I mentioned, it's going to be a short review of French services in the domain space in Canada and Quebec and how it works. And we will go through universal acceptance for Aboriginal languages in Quebec, and more specifically for Cree, Inuit scripts, and Nescapi. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We're kind of going back. One more. All right, so does your email server support EAI? Well, I've been trying it. So this is the address to check your own email address. And you might be surprised that your service might be UAI, but try it. This is the address. Next slide, please. There is a French community in all provinces and territories in Canada. 1.2 million Quebecers spend winter in Florida. 1.878 million Francophones are connected to the internet in USA. 2.1 million speak French at home. 2.4 million declare that they are originally French, 23 from New Hampshire, 25 from Maine. And I don't talk about Louisiana and California. Sorry for the little typo there. So UA can help assist governments and policymakers in reaching their citizens with a French email address. And Quebec is the official language. French is the official language in Quebec. Next slide, please. When we're talking about governments, you know, Minister Mélanie Joly has a nice accent on her Joly name, but she's not using it, okay? Mélanie Joly doesn't have an accent that parle de GC.ca. François Legault, Premier in Quebec. François takes a fiddle. Otherwise, the name is Francois, not François. So, you know, those two names are not the same name that they have in their passport. Next slide, please. These are the famous diacritic signs in French. So diacritic signs have been used for, first, make a difference between homonyms. Je crois que tu crois. I believe you believe. But je crois que tu crois with a circumflex, I believe you are growing. And une croix with an X is a cross. But it's always the same sound that you hear, okay? Next slide, please. Sometimes the sign that will change the signification or the pronunciation of a name. So task is in French tâche, but you have to be careful. Tâche, the spot. It doesn't mean the same thing at all. Next slide, please. Family names. There's a name that's very, very fluent in Quebec. It's Côté. But without accents, Côté means cut or rating instead of side. And other uses that have no relation with Morgan and Moody's. No relation at all. Next slide, please. This is my favorite one. This is a challenge for ICANN. This is a challenge for us. A fish, a sin, or a crop. La pêche en plein soir, fishing at night. Le pêcher en plein jour, a sin during daylight. La pêche tous les jours, a peach every day. The doctor awake, no? So, if you have one of these words in your web address, which one will be delegated by ICANN? Which one would be allowed? Which one would work appropriately? I don't have an answer to that. Next slide, please. My last word, salted fish. Salted fish means poisson salé with an accent on salt. Without an accent, poisson sale means dirty fish. Are accents important in French? Just a word to thank the UA team, Bill Juris, Glenn McKnight, Alfredo Calderon that I didn't mention there, but they are part of the Autochtone UA effort, and I thank that for that. Kwe Abenaki, Kwe Atikamek, Kwe Inu, Kwe Algonquin Wendat. Bonjour, French. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Louis. We'll see if we have any questions. Well, actually, we have one more person. So if people will hold questions, we can then have kind of a grand Q&A about the whole situation. Let me stop sharing here. I appreciated that. I had studied French all through high school, and speak it extremely badly, but I enjoyed the examples. See, it sounds it's a problem that's more fishy than peachy at this point. I'll say in English. In any case, our last but certainly not least speaker in our program today is Jonathan Zuck. Jonathan is the one of the North American representatives to the At-Large Advisory Committee, but we've given him away to the world as the chair of the At-Large Advisory Committee. Jonathan has been a dedicated representative, servant of the end user, and this is certainly an end user problem in so many ways. So I'll let Jonathan speak for himself. Jonathan, are you ready to go? And can we see your smiling countenance? Oh, well, there's a countenance, not smiling yet. Okay. There we go. Anyway, I will hand the attention over to Jonathan Zuck.
This is serious business, Greg. Nothing to smile about. That's why I begin my talk with a grimace. The internet is a wondrous thing when you think about it, and it should almost be inconceivable that all these computers are able to interact with each other. And it's often called a network of networks, and it was all accomplished because of the establishment of a kind of a unified language that could all use to pass information back and forth. And it's interesting how many stories there are throughout time about the difficulties that people have in coming together because of the lack of a common language. And so I appreciated Joe sharing that Tim Berners-Lee quote, because I think we need to remember that while the internet began as a network of networks and a bunch of linked computers, it's really become a network of people that have come together online in an amazing way. We find people of common interests. We find people that are craftsmen, that are small business owners. I got my chef's knives from a knife maker in Pakistan. These niche hobbies and interests that now have critical mass because you can collect people from around the world to discuss them and share them. So it really is a network of people, and has become so important. But as you've said, we've left a lot of people out of it for a variety of reasons, right? Some of which are economic, some are infrastructural. And this seems like a small thing, that, the bit of a domain name to the right of the period can't, or presumably to the left of the period in some languages, but to the right of the period can't be typed in somebody's native language. But it's really an incredible thing, because everything is a little bit of a barrier, and everybody makes people feel a little more or a little less welcome to be part of this network of people around the world. And so at its foundation, I think this notion of universal acceptance isn't just about software accepting email addresses. It's about all of us accepting all the rest of us in terms of our ability to be a part of this huge international community. So what you have, for those of you that are unfamiliar, is a situation where you have a keyboard very often that's specific to the language that you use. Some of you probably have inadvertently found yourself typing at a keyboard that was designed to be used for French, for example, and it's just a little bit annoying to try and type what you want because the letters aren't where you expect them to be, and the way that you get to these characters is a little bit different, etc. And that's kind of the experience of someone that's trying to use Arabic or Chinese or Cyrillic alphabet, is that so much of what they are able to do online, they can do in their own language, but just the very act of going to a website requires them to do a Shift-Alt-179 or something like that in order to complete a domain name. And when you think about the number of people that have difficulty learning software and things like that to begin with, even a barrier like that is something that can make somebody frustrated and put something down that they might otherwise make use of. So I think that there's a real symbolic value to getting this right and saying that, look, we really want to make the internet as inclusive as we believe it should be, and this move toward universal acceptance or compliance with universal acceptance goals is a big part of that. And I think that it requires all of us to let folks know that it's important. It becomes a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, and this is one that Greg mentioned during the informal part of the conversation, which is this idea that until there's people trying to book an airline ticket on AmericanAirlines.com in Arabic, then they are not that motivated to change the website to allow them to do it. But if they don't change it, then people aren't able to book that flight and probably don't try again. And so you have this problem of really needing critical mass of people using non-three-letter domain names, and in particular IDNs or international domain names, and demanding that the businesses that serve them accommodate that. Then you have this vicious cycle that these companies aren't motivated to do it. So we talked about it, and I think it was important for Jolie to mention that we need to speak to developers, and I think that's absolutely right. But a lot of the developers of the front ends of websites are long since moved on, and they're maintained by a variety of different people. It's really going to take businesses being motivated. And so what I really want to do, and with this group and every group we speak to, is commit to telling businesses that you have this expectation of them. And I think we can do this through email, we can do it through social media. I think we're going to try and experiment with trying to get as many people as possible on Twitter to thank a company that's made the effort to become compliant with all domain names and universally accept domain names of all type. And it could be that we, in some instances, resort to being critical of those who don't. And I think it's going to require all of us to communicate our displeasure with those vendors on a regular basis if we want to motivate them to change, because otherwise they won't. It's this piecemeal, one person tries, their email gets rejected, so they go and get a Gmail address and they use that instead, and then the problem isn't solved. I think we need, as a community of people that are trying to be as accepting as possible, need to bond together and communicate our expectation that those who benefit from this network of network and the people that have come to use it should only benefit if they're willing to accept everyone. And I think that we need to communicate that forcefully and in a broad spectrum way. And it's going to take all of us to remind all of these companies that it's our expectation that they evolve along with the rest of us and along with the internet. So that's going to be my hope, is that we do some more activation of people to communicate with these businesses that it's critical that they update their systems to allow everyone to participate equally. That's what I wanted to say. I saw an interesting question in the chat about ChatGPT. You know, I think we're all wondering what that's going to change, and you know what impact search engines and things like ChatGPT will even have on the world of domain names. And again, I think that becomes a real question of legitimacy for ICANN and the domain name system if we can't do the work to bring the world with us as we try to evolve that system to accommodate new people and new requirements. So if we want to prevent all the interfaces in the world to take place via ChatGPT, then we need to get to work and make sure that we upgrade these systems. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Jonathan. Much appreciated. Certainly looking for a brave new world, whatever it may be. And I don't know, perhaps ChatGPT is not as good in other languages and domain names as other scripts and languages as it is in English. That's an interesting question, whether ChatGPT can perform its magic in Kannada or Urdu or Farsi or Abenaki or Yiddish. I guess we'll find out sooner than later. So I'd like to open the floor to our audience or our group to see who has questions. So we have a hand up from Marita Mole. Marita, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Marita Mall speaking. This is a tech.
To our
Hello.
Heidi, can you mute, please?
Right. Thanks, Greg. This is a technical question from a very non-technical person. Maybe you can't answer. Maybe there's no answer. But I'm just wondering, how hard is it to do this? We're talking about a whole diverse group of people, from businesses to website developers to registrars, I suppose, who do a lot of website developing. I don't know, businesses, small, large, in between. Is it a really expensive, difficult, complex thing that they need to do in order to facilitate this kind of changes? Not changes. This is not a change that they have to make on a case-by-case basis, or every name that's missing. I probably would benefit from Louis' technical thing that's coming up, but maybe there's a quick and dirty answer to this. Thank you.
Greg, I can take that if no one else wants to.
Well, it looks like Louis has a.
I just wanted to start by saying, well, Marita, this is exactly what we're going to be explaining in
talking. We can't hear them.
We can hear Louis.
Is my audio fine?
It seems fine, yes.
Marita, you hear me? Anyway.
Yes, I can hear you now, Louis. Go ahead.
We'll have a transcript of the UA Day in Montreal, and you will have to practice your French because it's going to be explained in French, but we will have an English translation a couple of days later. So it will come from Kofomo, our expert in that, and they just can explain it very simply. It's not that fishy. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Jonathan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Marita. I think that's a really good question about the complexity of it. And the answer is that it shouldn't be terribly complex. It's more about finding that code sometimes, because the way that we have designed websites has really evolved over time in many, many aspects. And so if it's a website that's been around a long time, then that code may be sitting in the local code of the pages themselves, for example, so that it's doing local validation rather than going all the way back to the server to validate the domain. And so finding that code that's embedded in the HTML can sometimes be complicated. It really depends on the architecture of the website itself, whether it's difficult to do, but the code itself is not particularly complex. It's really just taking code that probably exists now to validate a domain name, the same way that there's code on websites to validate zip codes, there's code on websites to validate phone numbers, right? It's similar style of code, and replace it with code that has been written. And that's been one of the great contributions of the Universal Acceptance Steering Group, is actually constructing these toolkits and making it easy for developers to do that work. And then the people that make tools for developing websites have begun to update those tools so that even if you aren't thinking about this at all, you'll end up doing it right. So it's really about the old code, right? And going back and finding it, figuring out where you were doing it, where did I put that? Is it in every page? Is it happening on the server? Those kinds of things. Finding it is more difficult, I think, than fixing it. But the fix itself shouldn't be too complicated. A lot of the work has been done by the Universal Acceptance Steering Group to say, here's some drop-in code that'll do the work for you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's very helpful, and I've been wondering whether there's sort of a universal acceptance toolkits or UA for dummies, or the like. Glenn McKnight, your hand is up.
Great, thank you. I have two questions. The first one is for Louis, and the second one is back to Jonathan. So the question for Louis, if he could explain the reason why he's working with the Inuit in northern Quebec, and why it's so critical to bring this awareness, and obviously you can't do it without them, and how is the working group going to bridge this issue of assisting and working collaboratively with the groups, and obviously northern Quebec and elsewhere in Canada and the United States on the whole issue of IDN. The second question for Jonathan, he mentioned about the business case, and I put it into the chat. I think we need, in my view, is the pitch. I think we need the message to those business people, and I'm just curious on what that pitch is. What does it look like? I think we can't go for the heart. I think we have to aim a little lower into the back pocket and into the wallet, and why it has a lot of merit. So maybe if Louis can address that first issue, and then Jonathan.
Just a word to say that we are in a position where we want to be offering any help that we can. You have to take into consideration the fact that in some cases there's no alphabet. It's an oral language that's been transcribed by people, and it was totally oral at first. In the 18s, there was nothing, not a book, nothing that was written. So today we have a structure that comes with the Tomasky and some symbols, and it's a new language, and it's in Unicode. It's already coded, so it's going to be really first importance to have that language used in communication for the First Nations, and this is why we want to offer some help the much we can. So this is my answer, Glenn.
Glenn, this is Jonathan. Did you want to follow up with Louis, or do you want me to take your other question?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Oh, okay. I was asking Glenn. I didn't know whether he wanted to continue that. He threw two very unrelated questions out there, right? But
yeah.
So Glenn, I think it's an excellent question, and I guess I was, without being as explicit as you, talking about exactly the same thing. I don't think that we appeal to businesses by plucking their heartstrings. We appeal to people by doing so, though. And if we get together and communicate our displeasure to these companies, that can begin to affect their bottom line. If we come after them on social media and reward the ones that are doing well on social media, those start to be things that I think that are recognized. The actual business case for universal acceptance is a tough one to make because of the chicken and egg problem that we discussed, right? That the quick answer when I just need to make, and again, my wife went through this, when I just need to make an airline reservation and my email address is rejected, is I go and use a different email address and I make the airline reservation and I go back to my day-to-day business, right? Because making that reservation was more important than any civil disobedience that I might have engaged in as a traveler, right? And so I think the real effort has got to be for us to mobilize those of us that are online and that are interested to communicate with some of these big businesses in particular that have so much to gain or lose with the visibility on this issue, and to highlight either their compliance or non-compliance with domain name validation. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do. I think, unfortunately, this topic is not, I think non-compliance is not costing, and I'm using American Airlines, and they may now be compliant. So I just know they weren't, but they may be now, so I please just take that as an example. I don't even know if it's a good example or not right now. But American Airlines, at least at the point at which they were not compliant, wasn't losing any money because of it, probably, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that we face here. But it's such an important issue for ICANN, it's such an important issue for the internet as a whole. I think we all need to get together and apply that pressure, and that has commercial implications.
If I can just add a few words, Jonathan, I think that the pressure will come from various cultures that will be using UA, and slowly but surely it'll come, and it will spread. So I think it's going to be a long-term result, not short, but it'll come probably from the community that is going to use local languages.
Thanks, Louis. I think you're absolutely right, especially because this will have a very long tail. There's a lot of people that aren't even thinking about it, right? Just a local club website or something like that where, join our mailing list, and it has old code on it, that does the validation incorrectly. But I guess I'm not completely satisfied with the notion that in the case of multinational corporations, we should wait for it to just sort of happen indirectly. I think it's worth being activist about it and really communicating with folks, because unfortunately, without real pressure, there isn't a big economic implication for them. And I think that's what we need to do is stay on them, highlight it, and do a little naming and shaming probably.
And this is Greg. I would just
jump in for a second, Greg.
Okay, go ahead, Glenn.
So, I remember being at university, and everybody smoked in the room, and it had to be a combination from the bottom up, people who were concerned about their health, and from policy people from the top. So I think the only way this thing's going to be successful is getting these people in the trenches, those developers, the people working with code, actually to buy into this idea, and they generate the buzz as well as the people who are the decision makers. So I think we need a different message, and we need a different strategy, in order to get these people turned on. That's my comment.
This is Greg. I would add, kind of a gloss on that we need to think in terms of competitive advantage and competitive disadvantage for commercial, website and domain names and those who have, forms to be filled out and the like. Ideally, you'd like to have it be a competitive advantage. So I think you need kind of more of a critical mass of users who are not just switching to a .com email address, but are rather insisting on use of the TLD and the script of their choice. And I think this will come more from communities that are more invested in the sense in their language, in their culture. And, we need, I agree with everything that's been said. There needs to be a grassroots movement. It needs to be broad. There also needs to be policy and commercial choices. As Jolie pointed out at the beginning, developers need to be, one of the main points of attack, so to speak, since they're the ones who are actually fashioning the code, the sites, the parameters, but also those in the chain of delivery. There is usually marketing people involved. There's legal. It's not an ADA question or disabilities law question, but it is certainly an equality and equity question. So there's a lot different angles here, but I think we need to speak in the language of those we are trying to speak to the greatest extent possible. So I see Joe has his hand up. Jolie, I'll give you the mic, and then if you could hand it to Joe.
We have seen in the past spoofing issues with Cyrillic languages and so on, which have similar characters. Are there security issues associated with this? And my question's to you, Joe.
Your question is, what is the question?
What are the security issues with universal
acceptance? Okay. I don't have a technical background on that, so I will have to get back to you on it. I can't speak from authority on that one. Sarah, do you want to go before me?
No, I'll go.
Oh, I didn't. Unrelated to that. I didn't know if you had a comment. But anyway, okay. So for my unrelated to the security portion of things, and I'm doing the kind of fun, familiar ICANN thing where you speak in your personal capacity. But as someone who is, in a previous life, the history with grassroots advocacy organizations, along the when you were talking about, engaging with businesses and multinational corporations and making an economic case for something like this. And I'm not, whatever tactics, any advocacy collective decides to use is really up to them. But I think it's just something for thought is that most large corporations now have significant corporate social responsibility departments, and companies take on things at a loss all the time for, you can say it's for optics, but a lot of times it's a way to, give back a bit, right? So it's something to think about. You don't necessarily need to, make an argument on the balance sheet, for lack of a better word. And I think something like that could be very challenging in 2023 as there's significant economic headwinds elsewhere.
Thanks, Joe. And I just wanted to point out, again, totally in my personal capacity as someone observing this issue, I think one of the challenges here is the name universal acceptance. I know just trying to explain this to my family at home, they're like, well, that makes sense, but what does that have to do with those letters and those words? So from a communications standpoint, I think it's a bit challenging to explain what this thing is. But that said, I think there's some interesting ideas to get people to adopt it. Often it could be possibly part of a sustainability effort for corporations, or maybe the symbol itself could be a certification mark where somebody is ready, they get to use that mark to identify. But there's going to be a kind of a big gap here in trying to teach people what it is.
Thanks. We'll go to Jonathan Zuck in a second, but maybe part of the problem is that it's not as catchy and unique an acronym as it should be, and that universal acceptance is very generic as a concept. You're not even sure, what's being accepted by whom, and the like. So I'm thinking that Script and Language Accessibility Mandate, or SLAM, would be a much better and captivating acronym. And since nothing at ICANN gets done until it has a good acronym or a bad one, that's my suggestion. Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Greg. Two things I wanted to address. One is this idea of developers being a primary audience, I think, is a little bit misguided, because I don't believe there's a lot of developers out there writing this type of code anymore. It really dates back to when individual coders were writing their own code to validate email addresses in a form, on a web form or something like that. And almost everything is done via some kind of a toolkit now. For a lot of people, it's something very high level, like a WordPress or a Squarespace or something like that. But even for hardcore software developers, they're using libraries, they're called, basically, that include the functionality of validating an email address as part of a built-in feature of that toolkit. So it's my belief as a software developer that very little of this problem is going on today. In other words, I don't see it as something that there's lots of new code being generated right now that's non-compliant. Most of it is existing code that has to be fixed. And so that's why it's not so much something that you're focusing on getting developers excited about this. If you fix the tools that developers use, and I think the Universal Acceptance Steering Group has been doing a good job of focusing on those tools and getting those tools up to date, the developers come with it. It's not a situation where you need to go out to individual developers and say, the next time you're hand coding a web page, make sure that the hand coded domain name validation you do is better. That's just not happening anymore, right? That's an archaic art. And so it's all embedded in libraries and systems that need to be updated, many of which have been, and I think that's important to remember. On Jolie's point, about security, we have had some conversations about maliciously registered domain names, whereby when used in a phishing or farming scheme, where I have a domain name that looks like it says Bank of America, but in fact it has a couple of letters that are different, that just look like the letters because they're from a different script. And that has been a source of some security issues, but it's a disconnected issue from this one. In other words, it's something that we have to deal with when dealing with multiple languages online, and we are. Like, for example, now domain names, in many instances, most top-level domain names prevent you from mixing scripts within the same domain name, which is how those were done, for example. So that's an entirely separate issue to prevent the misuse of internationalized domain names, often done by mixing scripts, but needs to be dealt with separately than this particular issue which is just being able to validate that something is a legitimate email address in most cases.
I just want to say thank you, Jonathan. I did not know
That's
that
helpful.
they didn't allow mixing scripts. That's good information.
Yeah. So those issues are going on separately for sure. And to Joe's point, I think it's a good one. There is a lot of corporate social responsibility. There are people to talk to in these companies and to try and alert. And we should also remember we have ICANN. I don't know why ICANN couldn't decide, for example, not to use any companies, for example, that aren't fully compliant, right? That's a conversation we could have internally as well. And that's me speaking, not for myself, but as the chair of the ALAC. I'll just say it. Damn it! Let's get a movement going inside ICANN to put its money where its mouth is. It spends a lot of money out there in the world. Why should it be spending money on any corporation that's invalidating the very work that it does? Just to stir things up.
And this is Greg again. I'll just mention that, not so much in the United States in a organized or governmental way, but in the EU and in some EU countries, actions toward supporting or mandating ESG, environmental, social, governance, sustainability, etc. Efforts by companies are very much underway, and not just for the company itself, but the businesses with which those companies do business. So, for instance, in Germany, there's a Supply Chain Due Diligence Act that requires companies to be able to audit and essentially challenge their vendors and service providers to be basically performing appropriately in ESG matters, and also in different but related EU law, I think it is, or at least at the corporate level, businesses are requiring companies to get ESG ratings from companies that are out there that provide ratings, and to attain a minimum acceptable standard, which will probably get raised up over time as companies apply for this. And these are essentially become legal requirements and contractual requirements, where if, say, a vendor doesn't meet the standards, they can be found in breach of the agreement. So, we need to look kind of within each jurisdiction, within each region, for ways to characterize this in a way where we can borrow teeth that are already out there. So this is a DEI or an ESG issue in many ways, and we need to find whatever tools there are in order to entice more compliance with this. That's kind of my thought, and something that I've been dealing with in my business world lately is the increasing amount of pressure on particularly on large multinational corporations, and on smaller and non-multinational corporations, to both mind their own house and the house of their providers, or to perhaps suffer legal and consequences for doing so. So it is something that is not it's not trivial. So as we said earlier, we need to look for ways to communicate to companies that can make changes, or whoever can make the change, in ways that they can appreciate. So are there any other questions or comments on this? We have still quite a good number of people here. Some have spoken a lot. Everybody has listened a lot. But if we don't have any further comments, I will actually turn to Jonathan Jonathan, I guess you gave your closing remarks already, so we will just leave your big smiling face there in the middle. Now I'm actually going to remove the spotlight, and you can go back to your space in the checkerboard, in the Hollywood Squares, the Brady Bunch that we have here. In any case, let's see if there's anything in the chat. There's a lot of good stuff in the chat, but no questions or anything. So since there doesn't seem to be anything further, and we've all heard quite a lot, and there's a lot to digest here. We have materials. There are universal acceptance websites and microsites that ICANN, the UASG, has promulgated. I think they've been publicized. You can certainly find them, at least unless, of course, you're having a universal acceptance problem in getting to them. So I want to thank each and every one of our participants in this program. Joe Catapano from ICANN Global Stakeholder Engagement, Sarah Deutsch from the ICANN board, among many other places, Louis Houle from Point Quebec, Jonathan Zuck in his role as chair of the ALAC. I'd like to thank Jolie McPhee for providing all of the technical assistance, assistance is really too weak a word, technical leadership in getting this support, in getting this program done and out in the hybrid fashion, as well as for his contributions to the discussion. I'd like to thank each and every one of you who contributed to this discussion as it went along, and thank you in advance for the efforts that you will be making to promote universal acceptance in your personal and professional lives. I'd like to thank Moses and Singer for hosting us. I'd like to thank ICANN for its support. I'd like to thank NARALO and ISOC-New York for co-sponsoring this event. I'd like to thank Panera Bread for sending us far too many sandwiches. I'd like to thank all of those who have, over the years, created the internet and the World Wide Web, given us this magic that many of us spend far too much time on because it is magic, practical magic, that we want to share with the world in an equal and open basis. And until universal awareness is a non-issue, that is not the way the internet will be viewed by everybody. So let's go out there and make sure that universal acceptance is truly universal. With that, I'll sign off and wish everyone a good afternoon, evening, weekend, Shabbos, Pesach in advance, Ramadan, etc. Easter's coming up. So thank you all. And with that, I will call this program. Yes, thank you. And with that, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you and goodbye.